Welcome back to another episode of Music Design. Today we're covering Emotions from Xenogears, the 1998 JRPG developed by Square. The music was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, well known for his soundtracks such as Chrono Trigger and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Music in Xenogears has a Celtic Irish influence, and Mitsuda expressed wishes that players of the game who might not be familiar with the Irish influences would find themselves enjoying music from around the world. The song Emotions is an incredibly strong overworld theme for the game, containing an unforgettable melody and a melancholic atmosphere. Let's take a brief look at the arrangements of instruments Yasunori selected. I first have a double-tracked acoustic guitar, one in the left ear and the other in the right ear. This helps give stereo space. Following that, the bass is classic Mitsuda style, which we'll cover shortly. The synth pad and the strings both serve the same function, acting as a pad to enhance the other instruments. Next, we have the cymbal slides and the hits. Now, for our lead instruments, we start with the Irish whistle. I particularly love this instrument from the Celtic Era collection. In section 1, the solo violin will take over lead. And then the oboe will act as a backing instrument to the violin. Last but certainly not least, the tambourine will provide driving rhythm in section 2. Starting things off in this intro, we are hit with a variety of instruments all at one time. Rather than introduce one instrument at a time, Mitsuda decides to bring us into this world of sound and atmosphere. Let's take a look at the acoustic guitars. Interestingly, I used both a finger-picked guitar and a plucked guitar to give a slightly different quality to the sound. This arpeggio pattern movement is very simple, going up the G major chord, and then in the following pattern to F major. Upon returning to the G, the chord progression goes to an interesting place, arriving at this E minor 9 chord, and then to a D sharp major chord, before resolving nicely to a D sus, to a major D. As I mentioned, Yasunori Mitsuda has a very distinctive style in his bass writing. As I play through this bass soloed, notice the rhythm of the notes and the tricks that he uses. One technique is the use of syncopated notes. This is when notes are played on beats other than the downbeats, the 1 and the 3 beats. In measure 5, you can see the use of the syncopated note here. It's in triplet time. Also, he likes to use one note as a transition between each chord progression. Notice these smaller notes. Now let's play this with the acoustic guitar and you'll see what I mean. The sound of the bass is also distinctive of Mitsuda. Rather than using an acoustic bass like an orchestra would use, he goes with a fingerstyle fretless bass. Personally, a fretless bass is one of my favorite sounding instruments. A brief look at just one of the synth pads, this provides a hopeful and bright sound. Now compare this to the strings and the other pads, which will double the exact same notes. You'll notice first off that there's this odd dissonance going on. As it turns out, in synth pad number 3 is slightly off tune, which causes the music to sound more realistic and performed. Usually not everyone in a band or an orchestra is perfectly tuned. Having some instruments like strings that are slightly off tune can create an interesting atmosphere. Finally, the whistle melody is just a beauty to listen to. Just listen back to this first note and notice the expressiveness of the vibrato. This is what makes it sound awesome as a lead melody. Other cool touches include short grace notes like this phrase, and right there. And if we go back to that first note, I pitched this note up so it is sounding a D, not a C sharp, using a pitch bend. The same thing with this F sharp note over here. Now let's listen in to the intro one more time. In section 1, we switch our lead instrument in section 1 from the Irish whistle to the solo violin. The violin brings a folk-like Americana vibe to the section. The way the melody is constructed is very similar to the whistle melody, adding just a few more ornamentations for flair. Take a look at these hills below. This is the expressiveness of the violin. The higher the hill, the more vibrato and tension is added to the note. Let's take a moment to discuss how Mitsuda composed this melody. One method he uses is always having one note that he returns to, in this case the D. The phrases themselves are about medium length, only about 8 seconds long. The length of the melody line is important, because if a vocalist was to sing this, the extra seconds of break would allow for the singer to breathe. In the same way, having the melody instrument have some time to breathe allows for a more memorable melody. Lastly, repetition is key. Mitsuda repeats these two phrases again in the second half of the song, with subtle variations. The synth pad and the strings also change in section 1. Instead of holding sustained notes, they switch to short notes, while still playing along with the chord progression. Oboe is a backing counter-melody instrument for the violin. Notice that when the violin melody ends its phrase on its last sustained note here, the oboe will begin its little part. Also note the hills denoting the expressiveness. This is section 1 in full. This is an incredible section. The introduction of the tambourine is such a smart decision to create this powerful rhythm section. The acoustic guitars break out into the strumming pattern here. One thing you might have noticed below is the sustain pedal automation. These points that are on the bottom are when the sustain pedal is off, and then on the top I put it on again. It overall creates the effect of sustaining the guitar notes for a bigger sound. Here's with it on, and then off. Looking at the piano roll, there are a lot of interesting small details I added. The chords themselves are usually only about 4 or 5 notes, but sometimes I put these smaller single notes to realistically capture the sound of a strumming guitar. As the song progresses, the top notes of the chords may sometimes change, like in this section. This is just to add some variation. The last two chords of this entire section hang on a big D sus chord to a major D, like we heard back in the intro. The strings extend into large open chords and go back to sustaining their notes. I particularly love in the second half, where the notes will steadily ascend up to hang on this high G, and then swell into this lush chord. Beautiful. Now let's take a listen to the guitars, bass, and strings all played together. Let's look at that infectious tambourine. It has a really simple pattern striking the tambourine hits on the upbeats, the 2 and the 4 beats. It's really simple played on its own, but a wonderful addition in the context of the song. Finishing things out today, the solo violin continues the lead melody straight into this section. The violin instrument I use comes from Embrytone's Joshua Bell's violin, which is packed with expressiveness. Not only does adjusting the expressiveness hills in the hills below control the sound, but the velocity of the notes themselves can alter the notes, so I can tune it to perfection. The oboe and whistle return as one together, acting as a counter melody to the violin. The beautiful sounds of the whistle and oboe along with the violin lead make for one beautiful melody part. Also at the end, all three harmonize together in a wonderful fashion. Let's end things off today with a listen to section 2. Yasunori Mitsuda composed one of his greatest with emotions from Xenogears. If you haven't heard the soundtrack to the game, I recommend listening to the entire score, as it incorporates music from a wide variety of cultures. I thank all the people who have supported me on Patreon, including Kevin Huin, Sam Hanley, Manish Corona, Dennis Mowers, Justin Chin, and Alan Brown. Thank you for watching, and I hope every one of you has a blessed 2022. Catch you all in the next episode of Music Design.